Good afternoon. I'm Richard Duran, the Association's Marketing and Communications Manager. The Dorothy E. Hansel Marketing Award is a tribute to a woman who stood for excellence in horticultural and botanical journalism. Hansel was editor of the New York Botanical Gardens Garden Journal, the newsletter and bulletin of the Holly Society of America, the American Bonsai Society Journal, and the APGA Bulletin. This award recognizes an outstanding marketing and communications campaign that powerfully advances a public gardens mission. The Association is pleased to present 2 awards this year. Our first award recognizes the efforts of a garden that survived a direct hit by Hurricane Irma on the Gulf Coast of Florida in 2017. To support a fundraising campaign to help the garden recover, the garden's marketing team created an inspiring and uplifting look to using all messaging, and a comprehensive marketing campaign emerged, including blogs, e-newsletters, social media posts, digital and print advertising, and 3 Garden Member Magazine features. The campaign raised more than $2 million from 526 donors, giving a total of 560 gifts to the garden's recovery efforts. But more importantly, the stewardship of these contributors continues to ensure a sustainable future. The Association is proud to present the Dorothy E. Hansel Marketing Award to Naples Botanical Gardens' Replant and Regrow campaign. Our second award recognizes a campaign that advanced the garden's mission to discover and share knowledge about plants and their environment. On a shoestring budget of just $250 in Facebook advertising, plus some staff time, the garden attracted over 7,000 visitors and reached over 100,000 through social media in promotion of its first ever Tree Week during the fall of 2018. Even with those impressive numbers, the true measure of Tree Week's success was the attention it drew to the garden's living collection of trees, some of which date back to the garden's founding over 150 years ago. The Association is proud to present the Dorothy E. Hansel Marketing Award to Missouri Botanical Gardens Tree Week.
Hello, everyone. I'm Casey Sklar, the Executive Director of the American Public Gardens Association, and welcome to this wonderful session from the Longwood Fellows. In a moment, I'll introduce Patrick MacRae, who's going to orient you to the actual content of the session. But just first, a couple of quick Zoom orientation tips. This particular meeting is not a webinar like our other meetings during the conference have been. So everybody has a greater flexibility to see each other and to speak with each other. We're going to be utilizing breakout rooms through this session. so that we can give you guys a maximum opportunity of time to talk. So just know that it's going to operate a little bit different from what we do, and that you may need to be prompted to be unmuted, and we'll do that for you as association teams during that time. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Patrick MacRae, who is speaking on behalf of all the Longwood Fellows, along with Tamara Fleming, the Longwood Fellows Program Coordinator. And before I do that, just want to say a huge shout out and thank you to the Longwood Fellows Program for being such a great partner and sponsor of our conference. So take it away, Patrick.
Thanks, Casey. I appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. It's great to see a lot of faces that I recognize, a lot of names I recognize, and a lot of people that I don't recognize as well. So welcome. It's great to have you all here. My name's Patrick MacRae. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Education for the Garden Conservancy, and I'm a 2018 alum of the Longwood Fellows Program, and also the chair of the Longwood Society of Fellows Advisory Council, which is the alumni group for the Longwood Graduate Program and the Longwood Fellows Program. Thanks for being with us. I think we have a really interesting presentation for you today, and it's a little bit different. As Casey mentioned, it'll be very participatory, and we're going to be talking about a subject which I think is especially important in this particular moment in time, which is judgment. Before we begin, I just really quickly want to congratulate the folks from the 2020 cohort of fellows who have just recently completed their time at Longwood. So congratulations to Shauna Jones, Abra Lee, Maylin Plummer, Barbara Wheeler, and Nanette Wraith. And I just also want to tell you that the 6 of them completed a really astounding and beautiful cohort project, which is available on the Longwood Fellows Program website. And the project it's called GROW, a scratch pad for people developers. And it is a tool designed to help people evaluate their own strength as people developers and identify ways that they can build effective teams and identify their own areas of development in terms of how they can become best at developing high performance teams. So it's a great tool. I recommend everybody go download it and use it, because it really is a great contribution to the field. And I also would like to congratulate and welcome the incoming cohort of fellows who unfortunately had to be paused until next year because of the coronavirus. But they will be joining Longwood in June of 2021. So congratulations and welcome to Zach Borngraver, Noemi Hernandez Castro, Usman Ibrahim, Nick Lazio, Jolene Schilling, and Katie Sarek. And we'll all be very looking forward to meeting them and getting to know them in person. And I also want to just thank the association for providing time for the Society of Fellows to host this conversation. So thank you for that. And of course, in the audience, we have many people who are already familiar with the Fellows Program. But for those of you who are not familiar with the program, I'm just going to give a quick plug. The Fellows Program is a 13-month residential living and working experience that further develops high potential individuals' leadership skills while heightening their self-awareness. And I can just say that as a person who went through the first cohort back in 2017 and 2018 of this newly designed Longwood Fellows Program, it is transformational. It is a great opportunity to develop as a leader. And if you have any interest, or any of the people you work with have interest in developing themselves and their potential as leaders in the public garden space, then I really highly encourage looking into the Fellows Program. And you can talk to me, you can talk to Tamara Fleming, who's the program director, or anybody else who serves on the Society of Fellows Advisory Council, and we'd be happy to give more of a plug, because it's a great program. So we'll get into the content now. I just want to start by explaining a little bit about how we think this is going to work. We have right now about 36 people in the meeting, and I bet you that'll click up a little bit. But we're going to first discuss the article, which was provided beforehand, and which I believe will be linked to in the chat function as well. And the article is called "The Elements of Good Judgement: How to Improve Your Decision Making." But so first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly review the major themes of the article for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to read it ahead of time. And then we will break up into small groups. I don't know that we'll need 4 of them, but we have the capacity for up to 4 breakout rooms. You'll be randomly assigned to one of those different rooms. And one of the groups will be discussing the first three elements of good judgment that are described in the article, and the other group will be discussing the fourth, fifth, and sixth elements. So each group will have a moderator. Each group will have one person who will be asked to volunteer to report back to the main group once we come back together. These groups will last for about a half hour, 25 minutes or a half hour. And then we'll come back together and we'll have a little bit of a facilitated discussion about the most exciting or controversial or problematic or thought-provoking components of that article that you guys talk about in your small group meetings. And then we'll adjourn at 3:10. So now I will just get right into the content of the article. As I mentioned, it's called The Elements of Good Judgment, How to Improve Your Decision-Making. When we were thinking about articles for this discussion, the topic of judgment was just sort of obvious to us as something that we should talk about, because we all know that it's easy to have bad judgment, and developing tools to have particularly good judgment, especially when your path is not clear or when there's many options and there's no clear favorite. You need to have tools that you can employ to make good decisions and use good judgment. So the article is pretty straightforward. The author names 6 different elements of good judgment and practices that you can employ to improve your efficacy as people making judgment calls. And I think that one thing that I just want to mention is that this is important no matter what your role is within an organization, no matter what your position is. If you're the CEO, if you're an entry-level employee, it doesn't make any difference. Good judgment is good judgment, and the practicing of good judgment carries you right through your entire career. So I'll go through the 6 elements, and then we'll break off into our different discussion groups. So the first element that is discussed is learning. Likierman says that we should be listening attentively and reading critically. We should be asking open-ended questions. We should question information that's provided to us that doesn't make sense. We should demand quality information over quantity. And we should identify our biases and the biases of those on our team. And we should be interpreting body language, which is sort of a funny thing to do over Zoom, I think. Number 2 is trust. We should seek diversity rather than validation. We should seek advisors who challenge you and who challenge our assumptions. And we should build a team of rivals, as Abraham Lincoln did when he was building his cabinet. The third one is experience. We should recognize that past success isn't necessarily a proxy for good judgment. We should develop relevant and broad experience and try to make sure that we're learning as many different things that is a relevant experience to the task at hand as we can. And we should be analyzing our past decisions, what worked, what didn't work, and why, and seek to diversify our own experiences. So those 3 items will be discussed in one work group, and then the next 3 will be discussed in the other one. So number 4 is detachment. Identify and challenge biases. Recognize that cognitive biases influence the choices people make, and discuss biases in advance of making difficult decisions. Number 5 are options. Question the solution set offered. Explore ideas that may seem impossible, but avoid overconfidence. Be prepared to accept consequences if a solution doesn't work. And the 6th practice is delivery. Factor in the feasibility of your decisions and hold pre-mortem conversations to identify the things that could go wrong. So according to the author, if we practice and work at those 6 different components of good judgment, then we will be on our way to making good decisions that are based in knowledge and based in experience and based on good advice. So now I think what we'll do, now that we've got a little bit of a primer, and also there's a one-page PDF that we've created that has all of those spelled out in case you didn't take judicious notes for what I was just talking about. We'll have that up for you, and I think that it might already be up in the Zoom chat. And we're going to go into 2 different breakout groups. One will be those top 3, and then the other group will be the others. And just the thing to remember is that we've got to make sure we identify somebody in those groups who will be reporting back to the main group when we come back together. So I think with that, we just sit back and Zoom will do its thing and we'll end up in different groups.
Hello, those of you who are in the main session, do you need to get assigned to another room? Jenny? Abby? Or Peter? So Marisol, I think what you're looking for may be in that same participants.
Yep.
And if you click on each participant and click on the More feature, you might be able to assign them to a breakout room from there.
Yep. So Peter, I have assigned you, but I think you actually have to accept, perhaps.
Correct. Yeah.
Your audio is not connected. We can't hear you, Peter. Same thing for Abby. I will try again.
Okay. Yeah, we still can't hear you, Peter.
I'm going to try one more time, Peter.
Okay. And Abby and Jenny, it sounds like Marisol has assigned you, so if you're there, you'll probably need to go click on breakout rooms in your lower Zoom bar and join from there. Thank you, Abby. I'm glad that you can see or hear us. So if you can click on in your lower Zoom button bar, there's one button that's called breakout rooms, and you just need to click that one and it should join you.
Casey, I'm going to go ahead and jump onto one of the meetings just to check on things.
Yep, sounds great.
I'll be right back.
Okay. So Peter, did that work for you? Again, on the lower Zoom bar that you're probably used to that says mute, stop video. More over toward the right-hand side there's a button that says breakout rooms, and I think you have to click that. There we go. And Jenny, are you there? I just chatted you. Maybe that you're away from your device for the moment.
Oh, looks like Jenny got it figured out or left. Oh, she rejoined. Marcel, were you able to get the extra people into rooms?
Okay, we're just going to give a couple of seconds for everybody to rejoin. And let's see. So that was great. We ended up just having two breakout rooms. So now we've got plenty of time for discussion about what the most exciting and interesting pieces of information that were gleaned were from those two different groups. So in my group, we discussed elements 1 through 3. And I think one of the things that, in my opinion anyway, that seems to come out is that you can't really separate one from the other. They're so interrelated that the conversation inevitably involves touching on each of the other elements of good judgment as well. So maybe that'll inform our discussion here a little bit too, because it's just not quite as black and white as I think it is in the article. Let's see. I'm trying to find out if Rebecca is here, who's going. Oh, I see you. Would you like to report on what we discussed in our group, and then we'll just chat about that?
Sure, I'm happy to discuss a little bit about what we talked about. So first, we had some great examples. So Paul Meyer from Morris Arboretum talked about out on the limb. He said when that plan came together for that exhibit, which is a real hallmark of the Morris Arboretum, at least from my humble perspective here in the Philadelphia region, he said they were kind of through planning. And a donor came along and said, hey, I think we need to do more for families. And in his own words, he, swallowed his tongue, realizing that could be a lot of effort to kind of rethink things. And he listened. And using his existing kind of structures that he had in place, different committees, different boards, he had everyone kind of react and report in on what that exhibit would look like and how it would function and what it would do. And in turn, when it was launched, it quote unquote saved the Arboretum, brought in a whole new audience, increased attendance, brought family along. So he said in that moment, his ability to listen and bring other people on board really resulted in a great thing. Then another example from the Philadelphia Zoo, Kathy Wagner talked a little bit about how when she was a young leader and she was what she thought giving constructive criticism, how to pursue a grant. And her staff member said, do we have to do it your way if it still gets the same outcome? And she said, I took a moment and I said, no, as long as we don't hurt anybody and we get somewhere that we want to go. So she said kind of being reflective and accepting the challenge and recognizing that it can be done in many different ways in her moment of leadership. Then Alex, and I'm sorry, Alex, I didn't quite get where you're from, but he did mention he likes to recruit a smart friend kind of outside of the loop to be the critic. He likes bringing in that third party that isn't involved with decision making from the get-go and kind of embedded in everything that you do. So he appreciates someone kind of stepping in and giving it a fresh perspective. And then Susan, we went on to discuss more aspects of the article, and Susan said, I think the author too narrowly defines learning. She cites learning as being an ongoing effort, citing a personal example when she was a leader. She would often read Inc., which is a kind of a non-profit, a small business magazine. And she found a lot of resources there about HR management and just general kind of how to facilitate a business. So going outside of our realm doesn't mean you can't learn anything from other industries. And then we really zeroed in on this concept of asking open-ended questions, which kind of facilitates these other goals that are discussed in the article. So one, asking these open-ended questions helps kind of implement these ideas, creating this culture, this thought process, so that you kind of craft an area where you begin to think critically. Gillian Drake mentioned that you want to also listen. You want to get that multi-generational perspective, especially because there are so many new ways to communicate, so many new ways to work for volunteers, for staff member. And the other one, to flip it on its head, and I apologize, I forgot to write down who quoted this, but really insightful note is to flip the org chart on its head and listen to the folks who are on the ground so that as a leader you can facilitate what your folks need and facilitate great actions and great results. And finally, we pointed out that sometimes detachment is hard, and especially in the perspective of race orientation and all the intense things we're struggling with right now. So I think And please, anyone in my group, please chime in what I didn't cover. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of the topics we touched on.
I think you're the most effective note taker I've ever seen in my entire life. That was amazing. Very well
Thank
done. Does anybody have any particular questions or comments about what we just presented? And I can't see. I don't know why. Oh, there everybody is. Raise your hand or unmute yourself or whatever we have to do. Okay, I'll give it just a couple seconds in case somebody really wants to say something, but otherwise we'll move on to the next group. All right. So who would like to present from the other group who discussed the other four? And can you just remind us which three elements you discussed?
We looked at detachment, options, and delivery. And we also discussed how they were pretty well entwined and had a great discussion. And everyone was very eager to share personal experiences, although we didn't really talk about where everyone was from. We sort of just got right to business. And I'm probably not going to do it as great a job as Rebecca did. That was pretty awesome. We talked a lot about detachment, and detachment probably being the hardest of all the skills that are discussed in the article. We talked a lot about detachment in terms of the current goings on in the world and, sometimes bringing your personal life to work with you and having to sort through and separate everything else in the world when you come to the workplace. We talked about holding pre-mortem meetings and talking about suggesting possible failures before a project starts as ways of collecting options. And sometimes people react negatively when all of those options are out on the table, but it's good to sort of get them out and so that everyone can hear the whole spectrum. We talked about putting these elements into effect, putting them into practice. And one of our colleagues talked about, leading with empathy and, but also leaning in on surveys and data versus thoughts and preferences. And another of our colleagues talked about self-reflection and gave a really good example about having some serious team meetings with a group that includes a lot of older gentlemen on a team that had always been older gentlemen, and how the younger hires are younger women, and really trying to bring those two teams together so that they can work effectively together and that everyone feels important and like they're all doing a really great job to contribute to the overall goal. We heard a little bit about a board perspective and using sort of role playing in leadership to talk through all sorts of things, from fundraising to getting staff members out into the garden and anticipating having grievances from visitors about wearing masks. So one of our colleagues is doing some practice sessions, anticipating angry visitors who will not want to wear masks. One of our colleagues talked a lot about embracing failure and taking calculated risks, and how that is the culture that she set up at her organization, so that people are able to, discuss what they're going to do, take some risks, and not feel like they're going to get fired in the end. Another colleague talked about metrics of success, defining what success is at your organization, so that you can possibly fail or have slight failures or have elements of failure, but maybe something is still considered a success and you feel like you can take the risk. We talked about feasibility. We talked about how if someone is devoting a lot of labor to a specific project, that they're probably not. What are they not doing because they're focusing on a task? So labor hours is one of those things. When people are talking about feasibility, what is the whole spectrum of things that people are supposed to be doing with their time? And if they're focused on something, what are they missing out on? I think that's about it. Does anyone from our group have? That was a little circular, but does anybody? And then we talked about how, if we enjoyed this and how we've been using these articles and why we chose to join this session today.
Karen, I think you're tied for the best note taker I've ever seen my entire life. That was really good. Thanks for such a great recap. I think one thing that's very interesting, and we touched on it too, and it sounds like your group did as well, is the notion of creating a culture where openness and the ability to take risks without being punished, and a culture of question asking and deliberation. I think that's super, super important. And I'm just wondering, in the few minutes that we have before we leave, if anybody has any particular experience or thoughts to share about how you actually go about building a culture at your organization that can promote this kind of good judgment behavior. I don't know how we actually find out if you want to talk. I think just raise your hand and then somebody will unmute you. Tamara? Oh, yes. I think L. Anthony, but I don't know your first name.
Yeah.
You're muted. 1 second.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. Sorry about that. Laura Anthony from the U.S. Botanic Garden. We've gone through a number of changes in leadership over I've been here almost 18 years now. And I think one of the most telling examples was when our former executive director admitted to messing up in a meeting and just laid it out there and said, look, I'm human. I make mistakes. So I think if leaders can take the bold step of humbling themselves, it really opens up a whole new ball game. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. I think that's a great lesson for everybody. And Tamara, I saw you raising your hand as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in because everyone talks about how to manage change and how to do that and have an impact on culture. And as a scholar of that discipline, I would just say moderate yourself. Real culture change takes 3 to 5 years to really implement. And so give yourself a break and just realize that in advance. It's a lot of hard work and it involves tremendous amount of communication and trust building. So it's very easy to talk about change management and culture change, but it's far more difficult to do. And I imagine most of you know that.
Thanks, Tamara. I think that's, again, anybody who's interested in the Longwood Fellows program should definitely apply, because we spend 13 months talking about how to approach these kinds of conversations. It's very deeply complicated stuff. Does anybody else have any particular questions, comments? I am interested, if we have a minute or two at the end, just to hear what you think of this format. It seems to work pretty well. I think we've had good conversations, and I thank everybody for participating. What time does the session end? In 4 minutes or in 10 minutes? I think we have like 4 minutes left.
You have 10 minutes, Pat.
Do we really have 10 more minutes?
Yes, you guys can continue the discussion. I'll give you a little warning before your time is up.
Okay, all right.
You'll love Marisol's warning more than my warning, which will follow hers.
Fair enough. Okay, great. So let's see. Does anybody else have anything in particular they would like to bring up as a topic of conversation in the big group? Feel free to raise your hand, type it into the chat. Did anybody else think of something that was just really C. Sawyer?
People can unmute themselves. So you can go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to talk.
They can unmute themselves or cannot?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Great.
Hi, Claire Sawyers from the Spur Arboretum. One of the practices that I think we have really made part of our operation that I think hits on a couple of these, and that is always trying to take a moment after an event or after a program to do a wrap. And it allows us to throw out ideas without judging them then. You know, if somebody has an idea, we try to just put it down to say, here's something to think about the next time, without getting into that, oh, but that would cost, or this would make that happen. So it's just trying to capture that so it can simmer a while. It can sit there for 6 months before we then pick it up again to say, now it's really time to start planning for that the next year. So it's trying to, it evolved out of, I think, some facilitated meeting about, strengths and weaknesses, identify 4 strengths and 3 weaknesses or whatever. So it's kind of what worked, what didn't work, what are ideas for the future, and to document the details of it. And, it's funny because I almost feel like I do it in my personal life now. What worked for this family gathering and how do I want to do it different next year? And so I'm curious if other organizations have something that feels similar to that, where there's a structured way for the whole group involved in the implementation of it to reflect, to document, to celebrate, to acknowledge, to record, and to project or envision it's this always striving for perfection, right? So how do we get closer to perfection, and taking a moment to evaluate that?
Thanks, Claire. Does anybody have any comments? And I think you can unmute yourselves now, although I'm not sure.
Yes. People can unmute themselves.
Yep. If you're having
Claire,
trouble,
you always ask really difficult questions.
I think for where I'm at Ryman Gardens, one of the things that we found is that it's really easy to do that evaluation when things are relatively new, but the long-term stuff, I find that we stop doing it, right? Like events that have been going on for years and years, we don't evaluate them as much as we used to, and then all of a sudden we're doing something and we're like, why are we doing this again? And we've probably been doing it for 3 years longer than we should have. But all the new stuff, it's really easy, and it's like part of what we do, right? Like we just did some new initiative. We're going to sit down, we're going to talk about it when it's done. But then after a while, we stop doing it for the same ideas. And I haven't figured out how to fix that yet, but it is something that I've recently noticed we do a lot.
That's a really interesting observation, Aaron. I wonder why, if things just become sort of embedded into the operations of an organization at a certain point, and it's hard to kind of pull yourself back up to the 30,000 foot level and ask why. Really interesting point. Susan, your microphone is now unmuted.
Yeah. I wanted to say something about that, Aaron, and also where you were on my screen now. The idea of evaluating, what I really liked was that you started out by saying what worked instead of what didn't work. And I think that it's really important that we start with a focus on the positive, because it's so easy to get dragged into the rabbit hole of this didn't work and this didn't work and this didn't work, and that you forget what did work. And Aaron, when you were talking about we don't do this for things that we've been doing forever, I think that's where the article was talking about getting a new perspective. If you have a new employee coming in, or a new board member, or a new CEO, they're coming in with fresh eyes. They're more likely to ask the question of, so why are you doing this? And what's the purpose of it? But I wonder if you're doing it for new programs, if you can just kind of wonderingly say, hey, we've never done this for XYZ, and maybe start it that way for something that you're already doing. That's it.
Thanks, Susan. And also, I think it's important to think about how you empower those new employees to be able to raise those questions no matter where they are in an organization. It doesn't have to be a senior staff member coming in new and learning and asking questions. There should be some sort of ability for folks at all levels of an organization to, within their own sphere of influence, kind of ask those questions and evaluate for themselves too. I think that's really great.
Yeah, Patrick, I'd like to add something else. I mean, being at the Garden for so long, so many of our events are so entrenched, and it's almost as if I'm going along with what Aaron said, that basically, you've lost the why are we doing this, which is so important. So, and oftentimes, people could be hesitant to raise that question because they don't want to rock the boat. If it ain't broke, then don't fix it. So, yeah, I think that it's very vital to get fresh eyes, and that's why earlier in our discussion, when they talked about multi-generational input for decision making, is so important, because I am eons away from the folks that are coming in now. So it's great, and it's refreshing to hear the different aspects. So thank you for moderating a great discussion. I really enjoyed the interactive aspects of this, and it was just great. Thanks again, Patrick.
Great. Well, I thank you for the comments, and we are just about out of time. That worked out perfectly. Thanks for participating. I think everybody had the opportunity to voice what they wanted to say, which was great. We love hearing from you. And one more final plug for the Longwood Fellows Program. Reach out to me if you're interested. Reach out to Tamara. We're very happy to talk to you, very happy to answer questions and get people involved. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Patrick and Tamara and Longwood Fellows, for leading this, and for everyone for their great questions and comments. The next session will start right promptly at 3:20. There'll be some supplemental information that follows this. So thank you all.
Thank you, Casey.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure.
Thanks, Casey.